What happens when someone mistakes silence for weakness? When predators see a soft target in a young woman who speaks little and keeps to herself? They're about to learn that the most dangerous weapons are often hidden in plain sight, and that some people's quiet nature isn't born from fear, it's forged from a discipline most will never understand. This is the story of Sarah Chen, a 22-year-old college student whose calm exterior masked years of brutal training that would make grown men weep. While her classmates worried about exams and relationships, Sarah carried secrets that could save lives or end them. She had learned to blend in, to appear ordinary, to let the world see exactly what she wanted them to see. Nothing more than a shy girl who preferred books to parties. But on one cold November evening, when three men made the fatal mistake of seeing her as easy prey, they discovered that sometimes the quiet ones are quiet for a very good reason. Sometimes, the girl who doesn't speak much has been taught that actions will always speak louder than words. And sometimes, the most unassuming person in the room is the most dangerous one there. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Sarah Chen wasn't just any college student. She was the daughter of a fallen Navy SEAL, raised by his team, molded by the finest warriors America had ever produced. They had taught her to disappear in a crowd, to assess threats without moving her eyes, to end fights before they began. They had given her a gift that most people would never need, but some would desperately wish they had. Tonight, that gift would reveal itself in ways no one could have imagined. Sarah Chen walked across the university campus with the same measured pace she had maintained for 3 years. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, books pressed against her hip, eyes focused somewhere in the middle distance. To anyone watching, she looked like countless other students, tired, focused on getting through another day of classes and studying. But Sarah's awareness extended far beyond what her casual posture suggested. She had already counted 14 people within a 50-foot radius, identified 3 possible exit routes from her current position, and noted that the man by the library entrance had been in the same spot for the past 2 hours. Her training never turned off, even when she wished it would. The irony wasn't lost on her. While her classmates complained about their overprotective parents, Sarah had been raised by 8 of the most lethal men on the planet. Her father, Lieutenant Commander David Chen, had died in Afghanistan when she was 7 years old. What should have been the end of her stable family life instead became the beginning of something unprecedented. The men of SEAL Team 7 didn't just attend David's funeral, they adopted his daughter. Not legally, but in every way that mattered. Marcus Tank Rodriguez became her primary guardian, but the entire team shared responsibility for raising David's little girl. They had made a promise to their fallen brother, and Navy SEALs didn't break promises. Sarah's childhood had been anything but conventional. While other kids learned to ride bikes, she learned to read tactical situations. While they played video games, she practiced hand-to-hand combat. While they worried about homework, she memorized escape routes from every building she entered. Tank had been careful to explain why they were teaching her these things. Your daddy died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, he had told her when she was 8, kneeling down to look directly into her serious dark eyes. We're going to make sure you never need protecting from anybody. But more than that, we're going to make sure you can protect others when they need it. The training had started gently. Balance exercises disguised as games. Awareness drills that seemed like hide and seek. But as Sarah grew older, the lessons became more serious. By age 12, she could disarm a grown man twice her size. By 15, she could disappear into any crowd and track a target for hours without being detected. By 18, she possessed skills that most Special Forces operators spent years developing. But the team had been careful about something else too, teaching her when not to use those skills. Chief Petty Officer James "Ghost" Sullivan had been particularly insistent about this aspect of her education. Power without restraint is just violence, he had told her during one of their long conversations. Smart fighters avoid fights. Deadly fighters end them quickly when there's no other choice. But the best fighters, they make sure fights never happen in the first place. Sarah had internalized this lesson completely. She had gotten through high school without anyone suspecting that the quiet Asian girl in their math class could probably put most of them in the hospital without breaking a sweat. She had developed what Tank called the gray man mentality, the ability to blend in so completely that people barely registered her presence. College had been more of the same. Sarah kept to herself, maintained good grades, and avoided situations that might require her to reveal what she was capable of. She had 2 close friends, Emma, her roommate who studied pre-med and talked constantly, and Jake, a computer science major who spent most of his time coding and drinking energy drinks. They knew her as the quiet girl who sometimes disappeared on weekends to visit family, but they had no idea what those visits entailed. Those weekends were when Sarah returned to what she thought of as her real life. Tank had retired from active duty but still ran private security operations. Ghost worked as instructor for military special operations. The others had scattered to various careers, but they all stayed in touch, and they all continued to be part of Sarah's life. During those weekend visits, they would update her training, teach her new techniques, and more importantly, remind her why she had been taught these skills in the first place. "You're not a weapon," Tank would tell her regularly. "You're a shield. The weapon is just what you use when the shield isn't enough." Sarah understood the distinction, but sometimes she wondered if her guardians truly grasped what they had created. She wasn't just trained, she was programmed. Every response had been drilled into muscle memory until it became instinct. She couldn't turn off the tactical analysis that ran constantly in the back of her mind, couldn't stop herself from cataloging potential threats and escape routes wherever she went. It made for a lonely existence. How do you explain to a college friend that you can't relax at parties because you're too busy calculating sight lines and identifying potential weapons? How do you tell someone that you keep a go bag hidden in your dorm room with cash, fake IDs, and enough gear to disappear completely if necessary? Sarah had learned to compartmentalize these aspects of her life. During the day, she was just another student. She attended lectures, took notes, participated in study groups when required. She had even managed to maintain a respectable social life, though she was always careful to keep people at arm's length. But at night, alone in her room while Emma slept, Sarah would practice her forms in the small space between their beds. Silent movements in the dark, keeping her skills sharp, maintaining the edge that her guardians had given her. She told herself it was just exercise, a way to stay in shape, but she knew better. The truth was that part of her hoped she would never need to use what she had been taught. She had seen what violence could do, not just through her training, but through the haunted looks that sometimes crossed Tank's face when he thought no one was watching. She had heard Ghost wake up screaming from nightmares he never talked about. She knew that the skills they had given her came with a cost, even for those who used them in service of something greater than themselves. But another part of her, a part she didn't like to acknowledge, was curious about what would happen if someone pushed too far. She had spent years learning to blend in, to avoid confrontation, to de-escalate situations before they became dangerous. But she had also spent years learning to fight, and fights were what happened when de-escalation failed. On this particular November evening, as Sarah walked across campus toward her dorm, she had no idea that her curiosity was about to be satisfied in ways she had never imagined. The three men who had been watching her for the past week thought they had chosen their victim carefully, a small, quiet girl who walked alone and kept to herself. They had no way of knowing that their victim had been waiting her entire life for someone to make this exact mistake. They couldn't have guessed that every step she took, every route she chose, every seemingly casual glance around, was part of a defensive pattern that had been drilled into her since childhood. Sarah Chen looked like easy prey. She had worked very hard to look like easy prey, but as any Navy SEAL could have told them, appearances could be deceiving. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in any room was the one who looked like they belonged there the least. The predators were about to become the prey, and they would never see it coming, until it was far too late to matter. The first sign of trouble came at 9:47 p.m. as Sarah crossed the poorly lit section of campus between the library and her dormitory. Her internal radar, finely tuned by years of training, picked up the subtle wrongness before her conscious mind processed what she was seeing. Three men, positioned in a loose triangle formation about 60 feet apart, all moving in the same general direction as her but maintaining distance. They were trying to look casual, but their positioning was too deliberate, their pace too synchronized with hers. Sarah had been taught to recognize hunting behavior, and this was textbook predatory movement. She continued walking at the same measured pace, giving no outward sign that she had noticed them. But internally, her training kicked into high gear. Ghost's voice echoed in her memory. The moment you know you're being hunted, you stop being prey and start being a hunter. But never let them know you know until you're ready to act. Sarah's mind automatically began cataloging details. The man to her left was approximately 6 feet tall, heavy build, wearing a dark hoodie that would make identification difficult. His gait suggested someone who spent time in the gym, but probably focused more on bulk than functional fitness. Dangerous in close quarters if he got his hands on someone, but likely slow to react and probably overconfident in his physical advantages. The man behind her was smaller, maybe 5'8", but moved with a nervous energy that suggested either drug use or extensive experience with violence. He kept his hands in his jacket pockets, which could mean weapons or just cold fingers. But Sarah's training demanded she assume the worst. He would be the unpredictable one, the wild card who might escalate a situation beyond what the others intended. The third man, paralleling her course about 50 feet to the right, was the one who worried her most. He moved with purpose and discipline, keeping perfect distance, adjusting his pace to maintain optimal positioning without seeming to pay attention to her at all. This one had training. Maybe military, maybe law enforcement, definitely someone who understood tactics. Sarah's options flowed through her mind like water. She could change direction, head toward the more populated areas near the student union. But that would tip them off that she knew, and might cause them to accelerate their timeline or choose a different victim later. She could call for help, but campus security was understaffed and slow to respond, and calling the police would require explaining why she thought she was in danger when nothing had actually happened yet. Or she could continue on her current path and see what they wanted. Tank would have been furious if he knew she was even considering the third option. Never let them choose the time and place of contact, he had drilled into her. The moment you give up tactical advantage, you're fighting from a losing position. But Sarah had advantages her guardians had never taught her to consider. She was small, she was female, and she looked vulnerable. Every psychological study ever conducted said that these men would underestimate her completely. They would assume they were in control. They would assume they understood what was happening. They would be wrong. Sarah made her decision. She would let them make their move, but on ground of her choosing. Instead of heading directly to her dorm, she altered her course slightly toward the parking structure adjacent to the science building. It was isolated but not completely deserted, had multiple levels and exit routes, and the concrete pillars would provide both cover and concealment if things went sideways. More importantly, it had security cameras. If she had to hurt someone tonight, she wanted there to be evidence that they had initiated contact. As she approached the parking structure, Sarah could feel the net tightening. The three men were converging, their movements becoming less subtle now that they thought they had her cornered. She entered the structure through the ground-level pedestrian entrance, her footsteps echoing slightly in the concrete space. Sarah chose her position carefully. She stopped near a pillar that would prevent them from surrounding her completely, close enough to the exit that escape was possible, but far enough that they would feel confident about their ability to cut her off. She pretended to fumble through her backpack as if looking for her keys, playing the role of an oblivious victim, right up until the moment it was time to stop acting. The first man to approach was the big one from her left. He tried to look casual, hands in his pockets, but his eyes were focused on her with predatory intensity.
"Hey there," he said, his voice carrying false friendliness that would have fooled exactly no one who knew what to listen for.
"You look lost. Need some help?" Sarah looked up from her backpack with carefully crafted nervousness. "Oh no, I'm fine. Just looking for my keys." "Thing is," he said, stepping closer, "this isn't really a safe place for a girl to be alone at night. Lot of bad people around." The second man emerged from behind another pillar, the nervous one who had been following her. He was grinning in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral and confused rather than afraid. "My friends and I," the big man continued, "we think you should come with us. Somewhere safer." That's when the third man appeared, blocking the most obvious exit route. But, as he stepped into the light, Sarah saw something that changed everything. A small tattoo on his neck that she recognized immediately, a trident with crossed anchors. He was military. Not just military, but Navy. Sarah's mind raced. This man had taken the same oath her father had taken. He had sworn to protect and defend. And here he was, participating in what was clearly about to become an assault. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, but not in the way her attackers expected. Instead of fear or desperation, she felt something cold and deadly settle into her chest. Her father had died protecting others. His teammates had raised her to do the same, and this man was spitting on everything they stood for. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah said quietly. And for the first time that evening, she let her voice carry its natural tone instead of the carefully modulated uncertainty she had been projecting. The change was subtle, but all three men noticed it. The big man's eyes narrowed, and his posture shifted slightly. The nervous one stopped grinning. The military man tilted his head, suddenly alert in a way that suggested he was reassessing the situation. "No misunderstanding," the big man said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "You're coming with us." "I don't think I am," Sarah replied. She straightened up slowly, and although she was still barely 5'5" tall and couldn't have weighed more than 120 pounds, something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic of the situation. The three men were suddenly looking at someone entirely different from the girl they had been stalking. "Look, sweetheart," the nervous one said, pulling his hands out of his pockets. Sarah's eyes flicked to them automatically, no weapons visible, but his right hand was positioned in a way that suggested he was used to carrying a knife. "This doesn't have to be difficult. We just want to show you a good time." Sarah smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression.
"You know what's funny?" she said conversationally. "I've been wondering for years what would happen if someone was actually stupid enough to try this."
The military man was the first to recognize the change in her demeanor. His hand moved toward his jacket, but Sarah was already moving. She had spent 16 years learning to fight, but she had spent even longer learning to think. The physical confrontation that was about to begin had actually started the moment they decided to follow her. Everything since then had just been positioning and psychology. Sarah's first move wasn't a strike, it was communication. In one fluid motion, she pulled out her phone and hit a speed dial number, putting it on speaker as she moved. Tank's voice filled the concrete space with military authority. "Sarah? What's your status?" "3 unknowns. Parking structure by the science building," she said calmly, never taking her eyes off the men who were suddenly looking less confident about their plan. "One claims to be Navy." There was a pause that probably lasted less than a second but felt much longer. "Copy that. Are you in immediate danger?" "Unclear." "They've expressed interest in taking me somewhere safer." "Right." Tank's voice when he responded could have frozen blood. "Aisapia, Sarah, you are weapons-free." The phrase meant nothing to Sarah's three would-be attackers, but it meant everything to her. It was military terminology that indicated she was authorized to use whatever force necessary to protect herself. More than that, it was Tank's way of telling her that she no longer needed to pretend to be someone she wasn't. "Roger that," Sarah replied, and slipped the phone back into her pocket without ending the call. The three men were looking at each other now, confusion and growing concern replacing their earlier confidence. They had followed what they thought was an easy target into what they thought was an isolated location for what they thought was going to be a simple crime. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who was discussing their situation with what sounded like military command structure while displaying a level of calm that was completely inappropriate for someone who was supposed to be terrified. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the nervous one demanded. Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure there's enough time to give you a comprehensive answer," she said, "but I guess we're about to find out." The military man was the first to understand that the situation had shifted beyond their control. His training recognized what was happening even if his conscious mind hadn't caught up yet. He raised his hand towards his companions in a gesture that might have been intended to de-escalate, but the nervous one was already committed to his course of action. "Screw this," the nervous man said, pulling what looked like a folding knife from his jacket. "Just grab her and let's go." That was the moment when Sarah Chen stopped pretending to be a victim and became something else entirely. Her movement was so fluid that later review of the security footage would require slowing it down to see exactly what happened. The nervous man lunged toward her with the knife leading, expecting to intimidate or control her. Instead, Sarah stepped into his attack rather than away from it. Her left hand intercepted his wrist with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, redirecting the blade away from her body, while her right hand drove upward in a palm strike that connected with his elbow joint. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the concrete structure, followed immediately by his scream of pain and the clatter of the knife hitting the ground. But Sarah wasn't finished. As the nervous man doubled over, clutching his ruined arm, she pivoted toward the big man who was rushing toward her from her left. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds and probably assumed he could simply overpower her through brute force. He was wrong. Sarah dropped low as he reached for her, sweeping his legs while driving her shoulder into his knee. Physics took care of the rest. His forward momentum combined with the sudden removal of his base of support sent him crashing into the concrete pillar she had been standing near. His head connected with the concrete with a sound like a melon hitting pavement. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. 2 attackers were down, one unconscious and one writhing on the ground holding a compound fracture of his right arm. The military man stood frozen, his hand halfway to his jacket, staring at Sarah with an expression of complete disbelief. "Don't," Sarah said quietly, and her voice carried a tone that made it clear this was not a suggestion. He slowly raised his hands, showing empty palms. "You want to explain to me how someone who swore the same oath as my father ended up hunting college girls in parking garages?" Sarah asked. The man's eyes widened as he processed what she had just revealed. Your father was Navy? Lieutenant Commander David Chen, SEAL Team 7. Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off him. He died in Afghanistan protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. His teammates raised me. They taught me everything they knew about how to be a warrior. Everything they knew about honor. The man's face went pale. Oh, God, I know that name. He saved my unit in Kandahar. I was there when he died. Sarah finished. Yes, I know the story. What I don't know is how someone who owes their life to my father ended up here. Tears were actually forming in the man's eyes now. I got discharged. Medical. PTSD. Lost my job, lost my family. These guys, they said it was easy money. Just scare some college kids, take their stuff. Nobody gets hurt. But that's not what this was, Sarah said. He shook his head miserably. No, it wasn't. They lied to me about what we were doing. By the time I figured out what they really wanted, I was already in too deep. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. She could see the truth there, and the shame. This wasn't a predator. This was a broken man who had made a series of terrible decisions and found himself in an impossible situation. What's your name? She asked. Petty Officer First Class Michael Torres, former. Well, Michael Torres? Sarah said, you have a choice to make right now. You can walk away and pretend this never happened and spend the rest of your life knowing that you participated in hunting innocent women. Or you can make this right. Torres looked at his unconscious companion, then at the nervous man who was still moaning and bleeding on the concrete. What do you want me to do?
You're going to call the police, Sarah said.
You're going to tell them exactly what happened here. You're going to tell them that these two men have been stalking female students with intent to commit assault. You're going to tell them that you witnessed them attack someone who defended herself. And what about me? Sarah considered this.
Tank's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the most important thing a warrior can do is give someone else the chance to choose honor.
You're going to tell them that you realized what was happening and tried to stop it, she said. You're going to tell them that you're willing to testify against your former associates in exchange for the chance to make amends.
Torres stared at her.
Why would you give me that? Because my father didn't die so that his fellow servicemen could become predators, Sarah replied. He died believing that honor was worth dying for. You have one chance to honor his memory and prove that belief was correct. The sound of sirens in the distance interrupted their conversation. Sarah's phone was still connected to Tank, and she had no doubt that he had called for backup the moment he understood what was happening. Sarah. Tank's voice came from her pocket. Campus security and local PD are 3 minutes out. What's your status? Sarah pulled out the phone. 2 subjects down and neutralized, 1 cooperating witness, situation contained. Any injuries on your side? Sarah did a quick self-assessment. A slight scrape on her knuckles from where they had grazed the concrete pillar, a small tear in her jacket sleeve, but nothing that would require medical attention. Negative. Clean engagement. Copy that. We're en route to your location. Torres was looking back and forth between Sarah and the phone with growing amazement. Who are you? He asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time that evening, it was a genuine expression. I'm exactly who I was raised to be, she said. The daughter of a Navy SEAL, trained by Navy SEALs, to protect people who can't protect themselves. When the police arrived 4 minutes later, they found a scene that defied their expectations. 2 men lay incapacitated, 1 unconscious with a severe head injury, 1 conscious but suffering from what appeared to be a broken arm. A 3rd man knelt beside them with his hands visible, speaking urgently into a cell phone. And standing calmly next to a concrete pillar was a young Asian woman who looked like she should have been studying for finals rather than standing in the aftermath of what appeared to be a violent confrontation. Sarah answered their questions truthfully, but carefully. Yes? The 3 men had approached her. Yes? She had felt threatened. Yes, she had defended herself when one of them pulled a knife. No, she had not instigated the confrontation. Torres corroborated her story and added details about how he and his companions had been stalking female students for the past week, planning to assault them. He provided names, addresses, and information about other potential victims. When Tank arrived 20 minutes later with Ghost and 2 other members of Sarah's extended family, they found her giving a statement to a detective who was having difficulty understanding how someone her size had managed to incapacitate 2 much larger attackers. Self-defense classes, Sarah explained calmly. I've been taking them since I was young. The detective seemed skeptical, but had no reason to doubt her story. The security footage would show clearly that she had been attacked and had simply defended herself. The fact that her defense had been unusually effective was notable, but not criminal. As they wrapped up the investigation and the ambulances took the injured men away, Tank approached Sarah. "You did good, kid," he said quietly. "Your dad would have been proud." Sarah nodded, but she was looking at Torres as the police put him into a squad car. He had kept his word. He had told them everything, had provided information that would help them identify and protect other potential victims. He was going to face consequences for his actions, but he had chosen to face them with honor. "Think he'll be okay?" she asked. Tank followed her gaze. "Hard to say. Prison isn't easy for former military, especially when the charges involve stalking women. But he made the right choice tonight. Sometimes that has to be enough." Sarah nodded. The nervous man, whose name turned out to be Dennis Murphy, would spend the next several years in prison for assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy to commit sexual assault. The big man, Carl Stevens, would survive his head injury, but would also face serious prison time. Torres would plea bargain down to a lesser charge in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. He would serve 18 months in minimum security and would emerge determined to rebuild his life in a way that honored the second chance Sarah had given him. But Sarah wouldn't learn any of those details until much later. In the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, she was focused on something else entirely. For the first time in her life, she had been forced to use the skills her guardians had taught her. She had faced genuine danger, had made life and death decisions under pressure, and had emerged victorious. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt strangely sad. "Tank," she said as they walked back toward campus, "how do you live with it? Knowing that you can hurt people when you need to?" Tank was quiet for a long moment. "You remember what I told you when you were 8? About your daddy dying to protect people who couldn't protect themselves?" Sarah nodded. "Thing is, kid, protecting people isn't always about standing between them and danger. Sometimes it's about stopping the danger before it reaches them. Sometimes it's about making sure the predators know there are consequences for being predators. But those men chose to be predators," Tank said firmly. "You didn't make that choice for them. You just made sure their choice had consequences. You probably saved other girls from going through what they planned to do to you." Sarah thought about this as they reached her dorm. Her friends would want to know where she had been. Why campus was buzzing with rumors about police cars and ambulances. She would tell them a simplified version of the truth, that she had been approached by some men who meant her harm, that she had defended herself, that the police had everything under control. They would be concerned and supportive and probably insist that she shouldn't walk alone at night anymore. They would never know that she had never really been in danger, that the outcome had been inevitable from the moment her attackers chose her as their target. Because Sarah Chen wasn't really a college student who had learned some self-defense. She was a weapon disguised as a college student, raised by some of the most dangerous men in the world to be exactly what she had proven herself to be that night. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Sarah reflected on the strangeness of her life. Most people would never face a situation like the one she had just survived. Most people would never need to make the choices she had made. But for Sarah, tonight had been a confirmation of everything her guardians had taught her. She was her father's daughter. She was a protector. And sometimes, protecting people meant being willing to be dangerous. The quiet girl had been tested, and she had not been found wanting. The men who had trained her could rest easy knowing that their lessons had taken root. And somewhere in the city, other predators would eventually hear the story of 3 men who thought they had chosen an easy target, only to discover that sometimes the most dangerous person in any situation was the one who looked the most harmless. Sarah Chen had been forged by Navy SEALs, and tonight, that forging had been proven true.